I stood quietly by the kitchen door, my hands still damp from washing their wine glasses. The family was laughing at the dining table. My cousin Melanie clinking glasses with her fiancé, Uncle Rick bragging about his promotion, and Aunt Claire pretending not to see me standing there like part of the furniture. Then came the final blow. "Could you warm up the rolls, sweetheart?" Melanie called out, not even looking at me. I wasn't the caterer. I wasn't the help. I was their blood. But somehow, over the years, they'd convinced themselves I was just around. The girl who cleaned up, who fetched napkins, who never sat at the table. That night, I did what I always did. I smiled. I served. I left quietly. But what they didn't know, what not one of them cared to ask, was that I had already signed the papers. The estate, the house, the land beneath their feet. Have you ever been treated like a servant in a place you called home? My name is Lauren Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I was the girl in the corner of the Thompson household. It started when I was 8. My mom, Emily, passed away after a long battle with breast cancer. Dad had walked out years before that, and with no siblings or grandparents to lean on, I became a quiet problem for social services to solve, and in their eyes, the best solution was family. That's when Aunt Claire, my mother's older sister, stepped in. She and her husband, Uncle Rick, had a big house in Cincinnati, 2 kids, and a pool. They were the picture-perfect, middle-class American family. Aunt Claire wore cardigans and pearls even on Sundays. Uncle Rick ran a local finance firm, and their kids, Melanie and Luke, were already enrolled in private school. When I moved in, I thought I'd landed in heaven. My own room, hot food, a family dinner table with matching napkins. For the first few months, I kept thinking, "Mom, you'd be happy. I'm okay here." But soon, I realized something I hadn't been ready to see. At first, it was small. I'd wake up and see that Claire had already washed Melanie's school uniform, but mine was still sitting in the hamper. She'd make extra eggs for Luke's plate, but shrug when I pointed out mine was empty. I chalked it up to oversight, told myself it wasn't personal. I mean, who wants to think their family sees them as less? The clearest memory I have is my first birthday at their home. I turned 9. Melanie had a massive party the week before. Balloons, a bounce house, 3 cakes, and custom invitations. My birthday? They ordered pizza. No candles, no gift, just pizza. And when I asked why, Aunt Claire smiled and said, "Oh, honey, we didn't know birthdays mattered much in your family." In that moment, I wanted to disappear. I missed my mother so much I could barely breathe, but instead of crying, I offered to clean up the plates. That became the pattern. The years rolled by, and I learned to become useful. That was how I survived. By 11, I was packing Melanie's lunches. By 12, I was sorting laundry, washing dishes, cleaning the guest bathroom after Claire's book club left. No one told me to do it, but no one told me not to either. It just became expected. They never called me the Maid, but that's what I was. Luke once joked to his friend on Xbox, "Lauren? Oh, she's kind of like our in-house assistant," and everyone laughed, including Aunt Claire. The first time I heard it, it stung, but after a while, I let it settle in my bones like old dust. It's just how things are. You're lucky to have a roof. Be grateful. I repeated it like a prayer, but somewhere deep in my chest, I started storing little moments like a vault, locked tight. School was the one place I felt seen. My history teacher, Mr. Andrews, once told me, "You're one of the sharpest minds I've ever taught." He encouraged me to join the debate team. I won district. I got invited to an honors writing workshop in New York. Aunt Claire didn't let me go. "Too much travel," she said. "Who'll watch the house while we're out of town?" I didn't argue. I just stayed behind and watered her plants while they vacationed in Florida. By 16, I was working part-time after school. I saved every penny. Not to buy clothes or gadgets, but for something invisible, a future they never imagined I could have. At night, while Melanie watched TV or painted her nails, I would sit on my mattress, a hand-me-down from their guest room, and Google things. How to apply for scholarships, how credit scores work, how to start an LLC. I read finance blogs. I listened to real estate podcasts on my old iPod while folding their laundry. They thought I was lost in chores. But I was absorbing everything. Melanie used to say, "Lauren, you're so weird. Why don't you ever just chill?" Because I couldn't afford to. Not emotionally, not financially. I wasn't like them. I wasn't protected. They could afford to coast. I had to climb. There was a day I'll never forget. Claire's garden party for the neighborhood committee. She asked me to serve lemonade and cheese platters. I said I had a test the next day. She frowned and said, "You live here rent-free, sweetheart. A little help won't kill you." And just like that, I was reminded where I stood. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The more they underestimated me, the stronger I became. The more they leaned on me, the more they revealed their cracks. I saw the credit card bills piling up on the counter. I heard the quiet arguments about unpaid taxes, and I smiled. Because while they were throwing garden parties and planning ski trips, I was learning how interest works. After graduating high school, valedictorian by the way, I got a full ride to a local university. They didn't congratulate me. Melanie rolled her eyes and said, "Guess she'll be living here forever." They didn't know I had a plan. My part-time job became a full-time hustle. I started freelancing online, doing admin work, content editing, virtual assistants. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. By 22, I'd saved enough for my first investment, a foreclosed duplex in a nearby neighborhood. I didn't tell anyone. I rented it out. I reinvested. I kept working, kept saving, learned how equity builds. While the Thompsons remodeled their kitchen to impress friends, I bought another property, then another. Each unit I bought, I remembered every comment they ever made that made me feel invisible. And it didn't make me bitter. It made me unstoppable. But the most poetic part? One day, I was browsing a local property listing site, and there it was. Their house. The same house where I scrubbed floors, made lunches, and learned to disappear. Listed, on the market, a motivated seller. I called the agent. Cash offer. No inspection needed. A few signatures later, the land was mine. They never knew. Not until the letter came in the mail. Notice of ownership transfer. That was the day I showed up to the house again. Not as the help. Not as the afterthought. But as the owner of the deed. The Thompsons had a very specific way of doing things. And by specific, I mean perfectly curated for appearances. Claire prided herself on her image in the community, charitable, composed, and well-meaning. If anyone from her bridge club asked about me, I was always introduced as our niece who stays with us sometimes, such a sweet helper. Never family, never daughter, just background noise. But back then, I still craved their approval. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me hoped they'd eventually say, "Lauren, you're one of us." Instead, they said things like, "Can you clear the table, Lauren?" Or, "Sweetie, would you mind walking Max?" The kids are tired. I was 19. Luke, who was my age, was sprawled on the couch playing video games. Melanie was watching a reality show, but I was the one asked to help, again and again. They used politeness like a leash, wrapping it around my neck with "sweeties" and "do you minds," until I couldn't breathe without obligation. The betrayal wasn't in one big act. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. I remember one Thanksgiving. I had just finished setting the table, 12 place settings, all polished, all perfect. I wore a sweater I bought with my own paycheck, nothing fancy, but I felt proud. When the guests arrived, Claire introduced everyone, Melanie, Luke, Rick. Then she gestured to me and said, "This is Lauren. She's great with details. Keeps us all organized. Not niece, not daughter, just useful." I swallowed the embarrassment, smiled. Later that evening, while everyone laughed over dessert, I was in the kitchen scraping pie crusts off the plates. That's when Rick walked in and said, "You really are a natural at this, you know. Ever thought of going into catering?" That was the moment something cracked. They didn't just think I was help. They wanted me to stay help. Quiet, invisible, dependable. Nothing more. A few months later, I came home from work to find Melanie rummaging through my desk drawer, my private drawer. When I asked her what she was doing, she shrugged. "Looking for that perfume you borrowed from me last year. Chill." I hadn't borrowed anything. I told her so. She rolled her eyes and walked out, muttering, "God, no wonder Mom says you're uptight." I didn't say a word, but I noted it. And when I checked my bank account 2 days later and saw a missing $600, I knew where it had gone. Melanie had taken my card. She'd done it before. Little Amazon charges I couldn't prove, and I always let it go. But this time, I called the bank, froze the card, reported the fraud. That evening, Claire confronted me. Not Melanie. Me. "How could you accuse your cousin like that? We've housed you for years." I felt the sting of those words. Housed. Like a charity case. Like a stray they'd taken in. And that was the day I stopped trying to be part of their family. I moved most of my belongings into storage shortly after that. The only things I kept in the Thompson house were a week's worth of clothes and a backpack. I told them I was downsizing. They didn't care. What they didn't know was that I was using my storage unit as a home base while I prepped my real move. I'd just closed on a 4-unit building downtown. Renovation was underway. I spent my nights picking tiles, negotiating contracts, and teaching myself legalese. But during the day, I was still their shadow. "Lauren, the vacuum's not picking up." "Lauren, Melanie needs help filling out her grad school forms." "Lauren, did you see my blazer? I think you might have taken it to the dry cleaners." I didn't even respond anymore. I just smiled. Because I had a secret they didn't know. I owned more property than they did. Then came the day that changed everything. Uncle Rick pulled me aside one evening and asked if I'd consider taking over some light bookkeeping for his firm. At first, I thought he was joking, but he was serious. He said I was good with numbers and could help organize his paperwork for a small fee. I paused, then asked, "What would the hourly rate be?" He blinked. "Well, we're family. I figured you wouldn't charge." And just like that, the illusion shattered again. He didn't respect me. He didn't see me as a professional or a woman building a future. He saw a convenient tool. That weekend, I sat in the park alone, watching kids play near the fountain. I looked down at my phone and stared at the login for my bank app. Multiple accounts, steady rental income, a new property deal in motion, and yet, I still lived in a house where I was treated like a live-in assistant. That's when the shift happened. Not outside, but inside me. I realized they will never see me as anything more than what I was when I arrived here at 8 years old. But I had become more, so much more. And now, I was ready to act like it. It was a Tuesday. Unremarkable, like most betrayals tend to be. I came home from a meeting with my contractor. One of my apartment units had a pipe burst, and I had just spent 3 hours dealing with the mess. I was tired, a little damp, and all I wanted was to heat up leftovers and be invisible for the night. Instead, I walked into chaos. Claire, Rick, Melanie, and Luke were all gathered in the living room. Hushed voices, tense body language. The kind of huddle people form right before something ugly drops. Claire turned to me, holding a thick white envelope. My name was scrawled on the front in her neat handwriting. "Lauren," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I sat on the far end of the couch. Claire placed the envelope in my lap like it was radioactive. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter and a few documents. The first page had a legal header. Notice of removal and lease enforcement. I blinked. "What is this?" I asked. Claire cleared her throat. "We've decided it's time for you to get your own place. You've lived here long enough. The kids need their space, and frankly, we think it's time you grew up a little." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely thought this was a joke. "Grew up?" I repeated. "You think I haven't?" She bristled. "Don't get defensive. We've helped you for years. We opened our home to you, and you've taken advantage of our kindness long enough." Melanie chimed in from behind her glass of wine. "It's not personal, Lauren. We just need some breathing room. You've kinda outstayed your welcome." Outstayed my welcome. The words hit me like a slap. I stood up, trembling, not from fear, but from something ancient and volcanic. "Are you evicting me?" I asked. Rick cut in, his tone smug. "Not evicting. just formalizing what should have happened years ago. You're not a kid anymore, and honestly, you've been moody and distant lately. Maybe it's time you learned how the real world works. I stared at him, at all of them. The rooms started spinning, not literally, but spiritually. This wasn't just a letter. It was a final declaration. You were never one of us. Not really. Every dish I scrubbed, every shirt I ironed, every night I sat home while they dined out. It meant nothing. Claire stepped forward. We've given you 30 days. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. Instead, I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and said 4 words that I had been dying to speak for years. I already moved out. They blinked. I smiled. I have my own place. Actually, several. I walked past them without another word, up the stairs, packed my backpack with the only things I still kept in that house. A few clothes, my charger, a book. And I left. Outside, the air was crisp. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat in my car, parked just beyond the driveway I had mowed every summer since I was 12. I let the numbness hit me fully for the first time. They had kicked me out of a house I had helped hold together for over a decade. I was 30 days away from being homeless, if I hadn't already saved myself. But it wasn't just the betrayal that broke me. It was the realization that I had always been expendable to them. A backup. A utility. Never a daughter. Never an equal. I drove to the only place that ever felt like mine, an empty duplex unit I hadn't yet listed for rent. I unlocked the door, dropped my bag, and collapsed on the bare floor. No furniture, just my heartbeat echoing in the quiet. I cried for what felt like hours. For my mom. For the birthdays I didn't get. For every "sweetie, do you mind?" that I swallowed instead of confronting. I cried because I had spent half my life trying to be accepted by people who saw me as a convenience. And I cried because I was finally free. The next morning, I didn't wake up feeling powerful. I felt raw, like I'd been gutted. But I also felt something else, weightless. I sat on the cold wooden floor and opened my laptop. I pulled up the deed, the property listing. The one thing I hadn't acted on, their house. It was still listed. Still unclaimed, the price had dropped again. Rick's business had been failing for years. I knew from the documents he asked me to organize, but never paid me for. I also knew about the second mortgage they took out to keep up appearances. They were drowning, and they had no idea I was watching from the shore, already floating. I didn't hesitate. I made the offer. Cash, under asking price. The agent, a young guy named Brandon, called me the next day. "I can't believe it. They accepted." I laughed, a real, full laugh. Of course they did. Desperation never hides well. A week later, I stood in the front yard of the house I had once been evicted from. It looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in power. The garden was dying. The porch was cracked. The windows needed cleaning, but I saw it for what it was now, a symbol. Not of rejection, not of pain, but of victory. It started with a phone call from a number Melanie didn't recognize. She was standing on the porch, barking orders at the gardener when her phone rang. "Hello? Hi, this is Catherine. I'm calling regarding the transfer of ownership. I'm the new property manager, and I'll be scheduling a visit for a walkthrough and tenant agreement updates." There was a pause. "Excuse me?" Melanie asked, her voice sharp. "There must be some mistake. This house isn't under any new management." Catherine calmly replied, "Actually, it is. The new owner completed the purchase last week. You should have received a notice by mail." Melanie's world began to spin. She stormed inside to tell Aunt Claire, who immediately called Uncle Rick. The 3 of them huddled like panicked birds around the dining table while I walked in from the back entrance, dressed differently. Blazer, clean jeans, clipboard in hand. I let the silence stretch. Aunt Claire looked up first. "Oh good, you're here. Can you check if that call was a prank? Some idiot said this house changed owners." "I'm not here to check anything," I interrupted gently. "I'm here to confirm that it's not a prank. The house did change ownership. I'm the new owner." The words didn't land at first. Uncle Rick frowned. "What are you talking about?" I set the paperwork on the table. "This estate was part of Grandpa Thomas's undeclared land holdings. Remember when I worked at the city clerk's office for a few years? I found documentation buried in old property rolls. Grandpa had left this land in a trust, but no one followed up. So I did. Claire blinked. You... what? I followed the paper trail, got legal advice, waited until the property taxes defaulted again, which they did because no one was paying attention, and I bought the land legally. It's mine now. Melanie scoffed. That's impossible. You're not even... You don't have the money for that. I looked her square in the eye. I do now. They were speechless. It was the first time in years I saw all three of them without a single word to say. Melanie's voice finally cracked. But we live here. You rent, I replied. Technically, there's no formal lease, which means I'm giving you 60 days' notice to vacate, or we can discuss a rental agreement under my terms. The room felt like it tilted. Melanie looked like she'd been slapped. Uncle Rick gripped the edge of the table like it was keeping him afloat. Claire simply looked at me like I was someone she'd never met. You can't be serious, Melanie whispered. I'm completely serious, I said, my voice calm and steady. For years I've picked up your dishes, folded your laundry, cleaned your wine stains, and every time I asked to be included, you laughed. You dismissed me. You made me feel invisible. I turned the papers so they could see the signed deed. Well, you're looking now, aren't you? Claire reached for the documents, flipping pages in disbelief. How did we not know about this? I shrugged. Because none of you ever asked what I did all day. You just assumed I was doing nothing, that I was some wandering relative with no direction. You forgot I went to night school, got certified in municipal documentation, shadowed a real estate attorney for 2 years. You never even noticed. Melanie's eyes were wet, but not with sorrow, with rage. You planned this, she spat. You sat there with your fake smiles and planned to take everything. No, I said softly. I planned to reclaim what you never thought I deserved. Uncle Rick opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to set terms. I will not kick you out if you agree to pay market rent and treat me like an equal. That's the deal. The silence after that was suffocating. I turned toward the door. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, I file the notices. I walked out with my head high, the air crisp on my face. My legs trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. I had stood up to them, not with screaming or revenge, but with quiet, undeniable power. I didn't need to yell. I just needed the deed. It's funny how silence can be louder than screaming. After I told them the house was mine, the room fell into a stunned, prickling hush. I could hear the slow, methodical tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant hum of a lawnmower across the street. Melanie blinked at me as if I'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. You bought the house? I nodded slowly. Yes, not just the house. The entire estate, the land, the property line that runs all the way to the sycamore tree you all picnic under. Claire was the first to rise, her voice strained and sharp. This is some kind of joke. You don't have that kind of money. I smiled politely. No, I didn't. Not back when you were sending me on coffee runs while discussing Europe trips you never invited me on. But that tech startup I worked for? It wasn't a phase. It got acquired last year. I cashed out. 7 figures. Rick stepped forward, his face darkening with each step. You mean to tell me? All those times you let us treat you like the help. You were rich? Not rich, I corrected. Just resourceful, patient, and done being your doormat. The fallout began almost immediately. Aunt Claire started pacing, muttering under her breath. But this place has been in our family for generations. We were going to pass it to Melanie after the wedding. That would have been difficult, I said, considering it was never technically in any of your names. Grandpa gave the property to Aunt Evelyn, remember? The black sheep? The one you all cut off? Melanie narrowed her eyes. What does Evelyn have to do with this? I let the silence hang for a dramatic second before pulling a crisp document from my bag. She left it to me. What? Claire gasped. Grandpa's sister, I continued, holding the will high for them to see. She saw how you all treated me. I used to visit her every Sunday, even when no one else did. When she passed, she left everything in a trust, just for me. I didn't even know until her lawyer tracked me down. The rage hit like a wave. Rick stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard a painting tilted sideways. Claire tried to grab the papers from my hand. You don't deserve this. You're not even the same class as us. That's where you're wrong, I replied, sliding the documents back into my folder. I never was. I just pretended to be small so you could feel big. Word spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood knew. The same neighbors who used to pity me for being the live-in cousin who helped out were suddenly smiling a little too brightly at me, offering casseroles and invites I never used to get. Even the local paper caught wind of it. The headline read, Forgotten Heiress Turns Tables, Family Home Purchased by Maid Niece. Melanie, of course, was furious. She called me the next day, voice brittle with anger. You humiliated us. No, Melanie, I said calmly. You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for it. She tried to threaten me with bad press, lawyers, even emotional manipulation. Think about Grandma. She'd be heartbroken if she knew what you were doing. She knew, I replied. I told her everything before she passed. And you know what she said? You were always the quiet backbone of this family. It's time they learned that. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she hung up. The wedding got postponed. Rick lost his job after an internal audit revealed he'd been skimming funds, something I only know because an anonymous tipster, me, emailed the board. Claire tried to guilt-trip me, showing up at my door with teary eyes and trembling hands. I'm your aunt, for God's sake. You're the woman who once made me scrub red wine out of a rug with my bare hands while you laughed with your book club, I reminded her. She didn't deny it. I didn't slam the door in her face. I simply closed it slowly. But here's the thing I didn't expect. Not everyone hated me. Mrs. Langford from next door came by with a lemon cake and said, I always knew you had more in you. They treated you like a shadow. But shadows move quietly, and you moved right into the light. The mailman smiled differently. The barista down the street wrote Queen on my coffee cup instead of my name. And the staff who used to work events at the estate, they reached out too. I remember how you used to sneak me food when Claire made me wait hours to be paid. One caterer emailed. You were the only one who treated us like people. If you ever need help running events now, I'd love to work for you. So I did something unexpected. I opened the estate up for small weddings, workshops, and retreats. I hired the same people my family once looked down on, paid them well, let them lead. The house that once rang with laughter that excluded me now echoed with joy I helped create. The final nail in the coffin came at what was supposed to be Melanie's bridal shower. Despite everything, she held it at the country club. Claire made one last attempt to reclaim their place by gathering old family friends, gossiping about me like I was some vengeful monster. But karma has a wicked sense of timing. The club manager, a woman named Jenna, who once worked catering at our estate, interrupted mid-toast. I just wanted to give a quick shout-out, Jenna said, smiling sweetly, to the new owner of the Everglen estate, Miss Harper Grace. All heads turned. Melanie's face drained of color. I hadn't even been invited, but apparently my name was enough to shut the whole party down. Later that week, I walked the long hallway of the estate, my estate, pausing to touch the wall where my height had been marked in pencil as a child. I wasn't a maid anymore. I was the matriarch of a new legacy, one built not on entitlement, but on earned ground, quiet grace, and a spine forged in silence. And I was just getting started. It's strange how the most powerful moments of your life don't arrive with thunder or fireworks. Sometimes they come wrapped in silence, in a moment so still you nearly miss it. A month after the house officially became mine, I returned. Not with pride, not with bitterness, but with an eerie sense of detachment. I had already started the paperwork to rezone the estate into 3 luxury rental units. It was a smart financial decision, one that my mentor at the firm helped me map out carefully. But part of me needed to see it. To walk through the halls one last time, not as a shadow or servant, but as the rightful owner. I parked a few houses down, walked the familiar sidewalk that curved past the overgrown rose bushes, and unlocked the gate with a quiet click. The front yard was still unkempt. A few pieces of broken patio furniture leaned against the fence. Claire had moved out weeks ago, taking her antique vase collection and her emotional daggers with her. Rick had gone too, probably hiding out in one of his girlfriend's apartments, if not a motel. Melanie had been the last to leave, and not quietly. She left the back porch, light shattered, and the pantry door hanging off its hinge. But inside, the air was still. I stepped into the grand entryway where I had once vacuumed, unnoticed. Now, I ran my fingers across the dusty banister, feeling the weight of history shed like old skin. Room by room, I walked, not to gloat, to let go. In the dining room, I paused. This was where Melanie once asked me to refill the rolls, where Uncle Rick passed me his plate without eye contact, where I had once stood silently by the kitchen door, shrinking. And yet, now, I closed my eyes, breathed, and smiled. That's when the doorbell rang. Startled, I glanced at my phone. No one was scheduled to meet me for another hour. I opened the door, expecting a contractor or maybe a nosy neighbor. But it was Miss Fitzgerald. She was wearing the same quilted cardigan she wore every fall, holding a brown paper bag in her arms. "I heard it's yours now," she said softly, her voice raspy with age and emotion. I nodded. "It is. I made you pumpkin bread. You always liked it, didn't you? Even when you were little." I smiled, genuinely touched. "I did. I still do." She handed it to me, then hesitated. "Your mother would be proud, sweetie. She really would. They never saw your strength, but I did. You always carried yourself like someone who knew where she was going." Tears threatened to rise, but I held them back. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." She leaned in slightly. "Don't forget this house may be bricks and walls, but you're the story. You're the legacy, not them." As she walked back down the steps, I stood there with the bread still warm in my hands. That's when another car pulled up. This one sleek, black, expensive. I recognized it before the door even opened. It was Carter Daniels. He stepped out in his signature charcoal suit, loosened tie, and perfectly imperfect hair. The man who had offered me a job when I had no degree, who trusted me to run a team when I had nothing but hustle, who had unknowingly reminded me what respect felt like. "You're really doing it," he said, gazing up at the house. "I am," I replied, then smirked. "Would you believe I used to mop these floors?" "I'd believe you owned them the whole time," he said, stepping closer. "I came by because I had something to ask." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "My company's looking to expand our residential investment portfolio. We're looking for properties just like this. Historic, rezonable, income generating. I saw your plans. They're brilliant." I blinked. "You saw my plans?" "Jared showed me. He's still impressed by what you pulled off in such a short time. So am I." I looked at him stunned. Not because I needed his validation, but because it arrived without strings, without mockery, without expectation. "Are you saying you want to invest?" "I'm saying I want to partner," he said. 50-50. You run the property, the tenants, the design. I handle the capital, the legal. We split the profits. It felt like the air shifted. Not long ago, I had stood in this very spot and been told to keep the bread rolls warm. Now someone was offering to build a business with me. Not because of pity, not because of blood, but because I'd proven I could. I paused, then smiled. "I'll think about it," I said, with a calmness I'd never known. He grinned. "That's all I ask." After he left, I went to the backyard. It was quiet now. The breeze tugged gently at the clothesline that once held sheets I used to fold. I sat on the porch steps and unwrapped Miss Fitzgerald's pumpkin bread. It smelled like memory, like healing, and for the first time, I ate it without guilt. I wasn't the help anymore. I wasn't the forgotten cousin. I was the woman who owned everything they thought I never deserved. And somehow, the silence around me felt like applause. I still remember the sound of Melanie's heels echoing on the polished wood floors the day she moved out. It was quieter than I expected. No dramatic exit, no parting shot. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows after a storm has finally run out of rage. The house felt different after they were gone. Not empty, just honest. I kept the photos on the hallway walls, family portraits, old vacation pictures, even the one where I was awkwardly cropped at the edge. I didn't remove them. I didn't need to erase anything. I wanted the truth to live there too. All of it. The betrayal, the dismissals, the rise, and the quiet revenge. You know, for a long time, I thought dignity meant staying quiet, being agreeable, taking up as little space as possible. I used to think that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and kept forgiving, eventually, I'd be seen, acknowledged, maybe even valued. But the truth is, sometimes people only see what they're comfortable with, and when you start rising beyond their expectations, they'll either fight you or pretend you disappeared. That used to hurt, but not anymore. Because I learned something far more powerful than being accepted. I learned how to accept myself. I stopped waiting for my name to be called to the table. I built my own table. And when the time came, I bought the whole damn dining room. They used to call me the Maid, sometimes jokingly, sometimes behind my back, but always with that tone. The one that strips you down, not with words, but with subtle dismissal. And now I walk these halls not as a guest, not as help, but as the owner. And no title feels as good as that one. Free. Free from their judgments. Free from needing their approval. Free from bending my worth to fit their vision of who I should be. To anyone out there who feels invisible in their own family, who's always cleaning up after other people's messes, doing the emotional labor, being overlooked, please hear me when I say, you are not small. You are not background noise in someone else's story. You are your own epic, and you don't need to scream to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest victories are the most permanent. Sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace. I didn't destroy them. I didn't need to. I just reclaimed what was mine. The key wasn't just in the deed to the house. It was in finally realizing I had value long before anyone noticed. I just had to stop asking permission to believe it. So whether they ever say, I'm sorry or not, whether they ever realize how they treated me or not, it no longer matters. Because I know who I am now, and that is enough. Thank you for listening.